One of the defining characteristics one of the, one of the defining characteristics of the agile approach present in all agile methods is that they significantly redefine the role of the manager. What do managers do? In a traditional setting, they do quite a few things. Here is a list of 10 tasks which are typical of what managers do, and certainly managers do most of these things, and in many cases, they do all of them. One of the primary tasks of the manager is to define the goals of the project and of each iteration of the project. So that's part of what the manager does. It's not good enough to promise some results. We all have finite lives, so we have to define deadlines, and usually customers are very impatient. So that's also one of the manager's responsibilities, to define the deadlines. Then on a day-to-day basis, a traditional manager will assign tasks. You do this today, you do that next week. A manager is also going to be responsible for providing the interface to the upper management. This also includes often a role of umbrella, of protecting the team from undue interference with upper management. This umbrella role is, of course, one of the important roles of the manager. Not only do we need to interface with management in our own company, we need to provide an interface with the customer. Now, the customer be internal, it may be, that is to say, another division of the same company, or we might even be doing something for ourselves as a team, but most of the time the customer is well defined and separate from the team, and it's part of the role of the manager to ensure that the interface with that customer organization is smooth, and in particular that the team is aware of what the customer wants, that the customer is aware of what the team is doing and comfortable with it, and of course that at the end the results are up to the customer's expectations. In order for this to work, one must validate requirements, because of course the customer is going to help define requirements, but at some point it may be that some of the requirements are unrealistic, and because the manager is responsible for defining goals and defining deadlines, it's his or her responsibility, if needed, to step in and say, no, we cannot do this, it's unrealistic, or we could do it but not within the time limits specified. So it's important to validate the requirements. Now, the goals have been defined, and at various intervals these goals will have been realized, or so the team claims, or part of these goals, and so it is part of the manager to decide whether these goals have been met, or how much of the goals have been met at a particular point in the development of the project. It's not only goals that count, it's the time at which they are met. And so it's part of the manager's role not only to define the deadlines, that's kind of the easy part, but to enforce the deadlines. It's easy to say this is going to be ready in December, especially if you're in January. It's much harder to make sure that when December comes, the goals have already been met, have indeed been met. And of course, I'm talking about January and December, but typically in an agile development process, and in general in a modern development process, many of the goals are more short-term, and the deadlines loom on the horizon, so it's important to make sure that these deadlines are met. Now, these are all management tasks in the traditional sense, in the strict sense of the term, managing people, enforcing goals and deadlines, but managers in practice do more. Often the manager is a senior member of the software profession. That's not always the case. You have managers who are more of the MBA type, who are more pure managers, but much of the time in software projects, the manager himself or herself is a software professional, more experienced, hopefully, than the members of the team. And so part of the role of the manager is to serve as a coach and to mentor the rest of the team. A good manager is someone to whom more junior people come when they hit a snag, when they don't know what approach to use for a particular part of the problem. And as a seasoned professional, the manager is here to coach people and to mentor them. That's part of the role of many good managers. Finally, any well-organized team, and in general any well-organized company that does software development, will have defined some rules and some methodology for developing software, house rules, style rules, rules regarding the software process, rules regarding testing and software quality assurance in general, and of course rules are only as good as their enforcement, as their application. So it is part of the manager's role to enforce these rules, to make sure that they don't just remain ink on paper or pixels on a screen, but that the team actually applies them and abides by them. So these are quite a few tasks. Actually, let me warn you that there's going to be an exercise that tells you to define in, for example, Scrum, exactly who is going to take care of all these tasks, of each of these tasks in Agile methods, particularly Scrum. So that's the purpose of the next segment. What we see here in this first segment is that managers traditionally do lots of things. They have many responsibility in somewhat derogatory Scrum terminology that you find in the Scrum literature. Some of these tasks, and you can go back to the previous list and decide which are which, some of these tasks are what the Scrum literature called nanny. Taking care of the developers, looking over their shoulders, guiding their steps moment after moment, time after time, and some, particularly the last two, are more what the Scrum literature calls more guru. And managers do all these things typically, and the Agile approach sets out to change that traditional accumulation of tasks of the manager.